So, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Colin Koop. I'm Associate Director with Skidmore Owings in Merrill. And we started with the open space. So as we looked at the framework plan for this campus, we think it's really of critical importance for any compelling campus to have a set of compelling open spaces around which a campus can sort of intelligently grow and flexibly grow over time. And very early on in that process, we honed in on what we thought were 6 key principles that were particular to this site, to this particular pedagogy, and also particular to the program, the way that that worked out. And we start with the idea of a river-to-river campus or experience. And what we're saying there is that it's not that one side, one view, Manhattan, for example, is more important than the other. That really what we think is the beauty of this site starts with the water and extends and permeates inward to the center. At the center, we establish what we call the north-south pedestrian spine. Sometimes we've called it the tech walk. And really what that is that's the heart, that's the energy of the campus at the center. So you saw the population numbers, and we know we have to create one place where there's an intensity of experience, where indoor and outdoor spaces permeate out and in from each place, and where the open spaces then can knit everything together. So from that center spine that goes north-south down the center, you have then all of the open spaces opening towards the esplanade, opening towards the outside world. And that's really intentional. We wanted to sort of inverse the traditional model of a kind of closed quad and instead create a kind of open-ended set of public spaces. The buildings, we really want there to be a close link between indoor and outdoor spaces. And what we mean is that we want the ability for things like cafes, for things like building entrances, to create the experience that the energy that happens on the inside of these buildings, all those great programs and other things that Kathy talked about earlier, really have a presence to the campus and to the outside world. Buildings optimized for use and performance. There's a lot of different building types that were described, academic, corporate co-location, residential. Each of those has a kind of preferred way to be constructed and planned intelligently. One example, academic buildings, they want to be shorter. They don't want to be skyscrapers, right? So what we plan is larger footprints for those so that they can have the optimal sort of layout and do that in a way that sort of balances the quality of the open space. And then finally, livable and sustainable campus. I think Andrew talked very smartly about that. I think that extends not only to the design of the buildings, but also the site as well. So it's things like wind, water, and access to light, but it's also things about energy consumption that Adam talked about. So what we did is we started with the idea that if you start from the edge of the campus, that if you create a connection where all of the green space sort of permeates in from the edge of the water towards the heart of the campus, and then at the heart of the campus you create what we call the north-south spine. And to be particular to this site, you have to acknowledge the fact that from the corners is where the population that arrives at the campus comes from. So we have the tram, we have the subway, both on the sort of west side of the island. Vehicular access will come from the east. And we really wanted to create sort of simple desire lines where people can feel like they really, without much sort of break from their natural gait, are able to sort of come to the center of the site, really experience the intensity of the campus, and then at the end, because the entrances to South Point Park are also at the end, you can kind of connect intelligently back to that. But in addition to that, then you have a kind of second layer of connections, visual sight lines, other elements like that. Sometimes that's through buildings, sometimes that's connecting east-west, sometimes it's aligned with Manhattan's sort of city grid, but there's a kind of permeability to this campus. It's not at all about creating a kind of threshold or sense of separation. It's a kind of integration with the site that we think is sort of fundamental to this. And then what that does is that creates a series of spaces, flexibly designed parcels that can be academic, can be corporate co-location, and can be residential and other elements. And what we want here is not, let's say, a series of residential buildings on one end of the campus and all the academic buildings on the other. We really want to create a kind of dialogue between those different things. So corporate co-location, academic, those should be right across an open space from each other, so they really feel like they connect to each other. The ground floor, what the blue is trying to represent here, is because we have only so much program to create only so much energy on this campus, the ground floors of these buildings, they really want to target that central spot. We really want cafes, exhibition spaces, auditoriums, other things like that to really be focused on creating a kind of energy at the heart of the campus, and then allow the kind of open spaces to frame great views of Manhattan around. And that's really kind of critical to these ideas. So imagine you're a person arriving at the campus, that you would be able to sort of stop, see a great framed view of the underpass, continue on through a kind of slightly tighter space, capture a view through a building in 57th Street, back to Long Island City, kind of come to the sort of central plaza of Phase 1 and get a panoramic view of Midtown. There's a real sense here of kind of capturing views and framing them. It's a kind of basic architectural strategy, but I think it's really important that views are only as good as the way that you sort of frame them and make them compelling. So let's talk about Phase 1. What we want to do is phase from the north to the south. And the reason we want to do this is we want to kind of create core intensity of use in the first phase, a sense of completeness, and then as the campus sort of intelligently and flexibly grows over the time, it does so in a manner that doesn't disrupt the part of the campus that's already constructed. So if you look at sort of this development, we have the first academic building, which Scott will talk about in a few minutes. We have the corporate co-location, we have the executive education, and we have the residential. And then there will be a sort of one-story central utility building for the campus as well. And you see those sort of tech walk desire lines that bring you to the center, and then sort of spill you out on what we think is one of the key features of the open space in Phase 1, which is this kind of central tech plaza. It's a kind of meeting place. It's a spot where a cafe can spill out, where seats can come, where it can be used for any number of things. It could be, one day it could be a kind of marketplace. The next day it could be a kind of informal congregation space, or other days it just could be a place where you can kind of go and read and eat lunch. So all of those things are sort of being sort of developed and discussed as we sort of continue to design. The other thing that we're doing is we're creating one of those first sort of central green spaces, and this one really opens to the Manhattan view and really kind of frames that as the sort of signature space. So think about it this way. Similar to the way that you have academic, corporate co-location, residential, executive education, all the different programs represented in Phase 1, you also have entry plaza, tech plaza, green space, all those different things represented in Phase 1 as well. So the open space just as important to us as the buildings. South of that line then, essentially all of Goldwater will be demolished, and what we'll do is use the space to the south to essentially create a meadow for now. We'll also do things like a plant nursery, a tree nursery, so that the trees on the campus grow at the same pace as the campus itself. And this is really an opportunity to see what we can make of that space over time, and how the community and Cornell can think to use it for its greatest use. And then finally, just a vignette, as we would call it. If this is the central open space, one way to think about this is animated at the sides. You see people using it. One day it's just a kind of campus green. The next day it's the evening, and you can show a movie on that space with Manhattan in the background. At the end of the school year, you can have graduation. It's really meant to be energized. This is an energetic place, and you want the open space to sort of represent that as well. And there's a kind of vignette expression of what that plaza could be. Maybe there's a water feature at the center. This is sort of depicting it, almost flush, flat with the surface of the space. All of this is very preliminary. We're just beginning to look at it. But kind of idea of what that can be. So I talked a lot about the campus. I'm going to end with the improvements to the road. The existing road, as everyone knows it, is narrower than DOT standards allow. So the first thing we had to do is expand the right-of-way, and to do that, we expanded inwards, okay? So it's very important to understand that absolutely nothing of the esplanade or any of that space is being touched with the expansion of the road. But even though the road has to be wider, what we really fought for was still a single one-way drive aisle. But instead of having more space for vehicles, now we have a two-way bike lane with a generous buffer that allows those two modes of traffic to not be sort of intersecting each other. We have a single lane of parking on the interior edge, but that also will be space for shuttle drop-offs. It'll also be space where the curb can actually push out and capture existing trees that are there, so we can try to limit the number of existing trees that are torn down along the street. And then it includes new tree planting and a nice wide sidewalk. So it's a much sort of more generous experience of coming through that space, and we think it's a much more sort of attractive edge to the campus itself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and Scott's going to come up and talk about what data metamorphosis has done on the first academic building.